الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing in our classes on Umdatul Fiqh of Imaam Ibn Qudaamah rahimahullah. Last week we were talking about, we entered into Kitab al-Siyam, and we finished the first chapter in talking about how the month of Ramadan is cited or is established, and how we know when it exits. And I just want to finish that part before moving on to the next chapter, because some issues or questions that come up, and there's some details that should be answered. The first thing we want to talk about in moon sighting issues, some of the masail which are not in the book, is the first one, which is that we said it's not allowed to use calculations to establish the month. So the citation of the month is by citing the moon. Sumu, right? The Prophet told us to fast when you see it. So the sighting is based on the sight, actually sighting the moon. Right? So it's not about if somebody calculated it. So therefore the scholar said sighting the moon cannot be done with calculation, astronomical calculations. And we said that the scholars, they mentioned the citation, the benefit behind sighting with the eyes is that everyone can participate. So the fasting is based on إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُوهُ, if you see it. And if you don't see it, there's no fasting. But there's a faida, which is, can we use the calculations to help us in denying a report? That, some of the scholars say yes. So in the Bab al-Ithbat, in affirming citation, it's not allowed. But when it comes to negating citation, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin says, rahimahullah, you can. You're allowed to. And he mentions this in one of his students. He gathered Kitab Thamarat al-Tadween fi Masail Ibn Uthaymin, page 149. He mentions this issue. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin says, rahimahullah, I was asked a question, can we use astronomical calculations when it comes to sighting the moon, or establishing the new moon of Ramadan? And he says that which I take as a view is that it's permissible to use the calculations fi nafi, in denying the citation, la fi ithbat. Means if someone comes to you today and says, I saw the moon, and astronomers said it's impossible to sight the moon, then we can deny that person's citation based on the astronomical calculations that it's not possible to be cited. So this person is probably incorrect. So this is what he's trying to say. But when it comes to establishment, then we go to the Hadith Bukhari Muslim. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, our ummah is an ummah which is unlettered. At that time, we don't cite and we don't do math or calculations, nor do we involve ourselves in that. Means citations or calculations are not for establishing the moon sighting. In the Western countries, unfortunately, this is a common practice. So today we have calendars for 10 or more years. So as Muslims, we don't act upon that. The more correct opinion is an innovation to do that. So, but if someone today said, can we rely upon them? If someone was doubtful about the citation, Shaykh Uthaymin says, yes, you can. And this is because denial is not like establishment. And this will be like an added assurance. Because usually the astronomers, what do? They take all the aggregate data for the whole year. The moon cycle for the entire year. And then they'll tell you, for example, on this day, it's this percent likelihood to be sought or to be cited. So someone might come and say, I saw it, but say, no, the likelihood is very low, this person is not reliable. But if a group of people come, as we said, one reliable person or another group person, and they cite it, then it's established. And the person, it's only when there's some kind of doubt. Otherwise, we said before, how many people do you need for citing the moon of Ramadan? One sight. And how much for exiting? 2. That's it. So if it's only when there's doubt, the person who cited, we're not sure if he cited it, then we can rely upon the calculation to deny his. But if he's a reliable person, he's cited, then it counts, and we don't need to go back from that. The second benefit we want to mention is that scholars differ about how do we cite the moon, in the sense that how do we know Ramadan has entered? Do we go with a global view, a global opinion, a global moon sighting, or is it local moon sighting? But this is a well-known opinion among scholars, well-known discussion. And so we want to just quickly summarize the issue because it came up last week at the end of the class. The majority of scholars have the view that global sighting is the correct view. Means anywhere in the world, east or west, if the moon is sighted, then it's for the whole ummah, they have to fast. This is the view of the Hanafiya, the Hanabila, and the Malikiya. So 3 out of 4 madhabs, the Hanafiya, Malikiya, and the Hanabila. Again, within the madhabs, there are different opinions, but this is the schools, or we could say they're standard views. The Shafi'is hold the view that local sighting means every country and every, more correctly, is moon sighting zone. Okay, so they didn't use countries back then because it was not like us. We have fit these neat countries and borders. They used to use moon sighting zones, matali'. So every moon sighting zone has its own citation, which would mean, for example, two countries are close to each other, or a particular parameter. If one country cites it, the one next door also follows it. But countries which are far away, they don't. So an example they used to give is Khurasan and Andalus. Khurasan is like Afghanistan, that region, Iran, all that region, and Andalus, Islamic Spain. So those are two far places. So they say the people in the east, all the way in Khurasan, will not follow the sighting of people of Andalus, which is Islamic Spain, because the distance is too far. So that's the second opinion. So the second opinion, how do you sight? Well, it's based on proximity and the matali', the moon sighting zones, which again is one of the disputable points, because what is a moon sighting zone? Scholars, they differed. So the global opinion is what we hear in the Western countries. Most of the Muslim minorities, we follow that. For example, here we take that view as well. We go with the most people in the city, you could say, take that view. And both of them have their opinions and proofs. To summarize it, the majority opinion, they hold the generality of the hadiths. The Prophet ﷺ said, sight fast when you sight the moon. He made it general, he made it for everybody. He didn't speak to the people of Medina, speaking to the whole ummah. If you see it, who's you? Everybody. So they said that the hadith is general, so everyone follows it. Second opinion, they used a specific hadith, the hadith of Abdullah bin Abbas, anhuma, which is Sahih Muslim. And the story, in the summary, is that he had a discussion with one of his students, Quraib, and he asked about the moon sighting. Are you going to follow the citation of Muawiyah radiallahu anhu in Sham? And Abbas mentioned when he asked him, what do you guys start fasting? Because he traveled there, Quraib, and he fasted with Muawiyah's sighting. Then he asked Abbas when he came later in Medina, what are you guys following? He said, we sighted this day. So he told him, isn't the sighting of Muawiyah sufficient for you? He said, we were taught each to follow their own. Our sighting is sufficient for us, and that's for him. So here, this hadith looks like it shows that the people of Medina don't follow people of Sham. And so the argument will be that because they're two different moon sighting zones. So people of Medina have their own sighting because they're too far from the people of Sham. Sham have their own sighting. The majority of scholars responded to them saying that the hadith is authentic, it's Sahih Muslim, but the problem with the hadith is could be the ijtihad of Abdullah bin Abbas, because there's no hadith without wording. Ibn Abbas said this. Secondly, the generality of Prophet's statements is still there. So again, they differ back and forth, and also today's time, many scholars, like Shaykh Al-Albani rahimahullah, and the contemporary scholars who hold that view, they said, well, at that time, it's not possible for Ahl Sham to follow the people of Medina, because there's no communication that could go fast enough. But today we have the technology. So a citation could be seen on the news or the social media or newspaper, or you can call them and then they can follow. So from that angle, they said the unity of the ummah can be established through this, so therefore we have to go with this view. And again, you can see the different viewpoints. Today's time, our contemporary scholars are split on it as well. So Shaykh Baz bin Uthaymin, they take the local sighting view, and then I believe Shaykh Muqbil as well, and Shaykh Al-Albani takes the global sighting. But again, the Jumhur ulama in the past were that side. But all of these disputes, they don't have impact on us. Particularly, why? Because it's a third opinion. And this is a third opinion, is very useful, because you may notice that the third opinion is probably the most practiced of all of the opinions. And what's the third opinion? It's the Maliki opinion, or opinion from the Malikiyah. And their opinion is that you go with the country or the government of that land, whatever they decide. And this is the view that they ascribe to Imam Malik, rahimahullah. So this is a third opinion. Some of the Malikiyah, not all of them. They say that it goes back to the Wali Amr, the ruler of that land. So for example, Saudi Arabia, a big country, very big. And so obviously, if they side in the south and in the north, they take it all, wherever they sited. Even though if you see distance-wise, it's quite far. Because they say that ultimately, this is the view of the position of the government. The government takes sighting of the whole land. So that's the third view, and this is the view also Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah inclined to. And the argument behind it is that if the goal is to achieve unity, this is the best way to achieve unity. Because ultimately, if one country is divided across 2 or 3 moon sighting zones, what are we going to do? Half the country is one day, half another day? And Shaykh Uthaymin mentioned this point that he actually was honest. And he has ta'ariqat, notes on another book on the Hanbali madhab. Shaykh Uthaymin talks about this reality, and it's very important to know. Because ultimately, you only have 2 views. You want to be practical. 2 views, the global view or the whole country view. Because the local moon sighting view creates division within countries. Remember, back in the day, there's no Saudi Arabia, there's no Yemen, there's just regions. So Shaykh Uthaymin Ta'liqat al-Kafi, Ibn Qudaamah, he says ultimately there's only these two views, the global sighting or we go with the whole country. Otherwise, we're going to end up in some kind of siyasa. For example, some countries are close to each other, but they don't like each other, he said, they have two different moon sighting zones, even though they're next to each other. And those have good agreement, they have the same with Ramadan. I'm sure you can see that, within Asia even, right? They're right next to each other. How is it possible the moon came there, didn't come there? The moon was there both, but this country doesn't like that country, so they go the next day, they go this day. And this is the problem. So ultimately, there's two views you could say that's actually applicable to this time. Whatever the rule of the country decides for everybody, or the second view, you go to global sighting. So this is something that Shaykh Uthaymin mentions, and it's a good point to highlight that ultimately the application of the second opinion, which is the views, the moon sighting zone, is complicated. Some may say, how do we know a moon sighting zone to begin with? What's the distance? Shaykh Abdullah Bassam, rahimahullah, he mentioned Tawdih al-Ahkam. If the two countries have a distance of 2,226 kilometers, 2,226 kilometers between two countries or less, then they're in the same moon sighting zone. Again, this is his ijtihad in volume 3, page 453. He says this is what the muhaqqiqun wa ahlul ulama al-athar, they came to this conclusion, wa ahlul nadhar, that if this is what is considered a moon sighting zone, 2,226 kilometers. So that or less. If they have that distance between them or less, they're in the same moon sighting zone. Again, it's just ijtihad of some of the ulama. Why is this important? Ultimately, sometimes, right, this will come useful in a second when we see in our situation in the Western countries, but that's what they would say is considered a moon sighting zone. Some of the scholars who take the first opinion said all of this is based on ijtihadat, no adillah, clear adillah, and also it's hard to, like we said, apply it because Prophet ﷺ, when he died, he left us with a hadith with generality. So ultimately, if the ummah wants to unite, then it's better to go with the general hadith. But either of the two views or three views, whatever view someone holds, there's no problem. Some people, they get fed up for no reason, get riled up. They want the whole ummah to pray one Eid. We're going to pray Eid together. It's okay. In one locality. Because the difference between the moon sighting zones is like different in salawat. We don't pray Isha the whole world together at one time. Some people are angry. Why do we have different Eid? Well, you don't pray Isha together. What's the problem? So this concept is wrong too. And if we take the second opinion, we go with different Eids, we're all celebrating Eid. But some people, they get angry because they think that this is division of the ummah. If it happened in the time of Sahaba and the early scholars, this is differing. This is not a differing which is considered blameworthy. So the reason I'm saying that is because even though here in this country, or this city, we might have a difference, inshallah, it's within difference of opinion that is acceptable. But what do we do specifically for us here in the Western countries? That's a third point we have to mention. Scholars, they say if you're living in a country where it's not a Muslim country, then in that situation, you should go to the position of the Muslim society or the marakiz, the centers, the masajid, whatever they decide you follow. The problem with that is that there are many masajid. So you try to see what is their general opinion. Majority here, they are going with the global sighting, wherever it's sighted they follow. And therefore, someone should go with that. Someone has, for example, a local masjid, he can follow his local masjid, his locality, since he will pray there. And that is fine. But what happens if there is no such a thing? Some townships, they don't even have a Muslim council or a masjid that has a board or anything. In that case, the scholars say that you have two choices. Number one, you go with the global sighting, or you go with the nearest Muslim sighting, nearest Muslim country sighting. But let's say there's a country which there's no one position. Everybody has, or there's such a small community, no one has anything. There's no imam or community that has a decision for everybody. In that case, they can go with the citation of the globe. Anywhere that's cited, they can follow their Eid and their Ramadan. Or they can go to the nearest Muslim country sighting. So from our contemporary scholars, those two views are there. Shaykh bin Baz, rahimahullah, he takes the view that you go with Saudi Arabia. And we have an article in Torah Da'wah on that. Not because Saudi Arabia is the country he's in, but because he said this is the most reliable of all the citations. In the sense that they are very, very careful compared to other countries, which number one might rely upon astronomical calculations. There are some Muslim countries do that. And some that have more easygoing. So he says you go with Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia also means the global. It's not just Saudi Arabia. Because we said that whatever that region, wherever it's cited. Sheikh Mu'athaymin's view is that you go with the closest Muslim country. Okay? And the reason why I'm saying this is Sheikh Mu'athaymin, he's more strict on the view of the local sighting. He says, so if there's nobody, he says, those in Bilad al-Gharb, they go with the closest Muslim sighting. This is closer, he says, to the truth than following Saudi Arabia or any other country. So what would that mean then? What's the closest Muslim country to us? West Africa or Morocco. And that's what used to be happening. You can see in the UK and back in the 80s, everyone used to look at Morocco. Then it shifted to Saudi, suddenly. So some people say, what is going on here? Then now it's shifting locally to the UK. The problem is in Toronto, we can't necessarily cite. As you see, some people say they're citing in Toronto, and there's nobody who's citing in Toronto. There's nobody. So those who take the local view in Toronto are citing where? California. And I think there's thousands, hundreds of kilometers between us and them. That's another problem. So some people say we take a local sighting, they're looking in California. That's not the local opinion. Because you have to check if within the distance. And second thing also we notice is that those who take that view, that if we're living in a place where there's no citation, we should look the other way, east. Which leads to a question when the brothers asked last week. The people in the east and the people in the west, do they look to each other for citation? So if you take the global opinion, it doesn't matter where you cite it, east or west. The global opinion, if it's cited in the west, the moon's seen in the east or the west, you follow it. But according to the second opinion, which is the moon sighting zone, the people in the west have to follow the people in the east, but the people in the east don't follow those in the west. This is what's mentioned by some of the earlier scholars. For example, Ibn Qasim in Hashiyah Rawd al-Murbi', Shaykh Uthaymin in Sharh al-Mumti', he also mentions that. And his argument is that the people in the east, they do not follow the people in the west in the citation because the people in the east, the moon comes to them first. So if the moon is not seen in the east, then it's more likely not to be seen in the west, because Allah says that the moon moves slowly, وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا, and the moon when it moves slowly. For example, the whole people in the east didn't see it. Didn't it appear in the west? No. The moon doesn't work like that. That the moon is separated here and from there. But the possibility would be that, if, for example, the citation is seen in the west, and then we cite it in the people in the east, usually people in the east will see it before us, or someone in the middle will see it, or some other region. Hence, a lot of times you may see, a couple of years ago there was a confusion about it, where they cited something in the west and the people in the east didn't follow. The reason why they didn't follow is because they take the view that the people in the east don't have to follow those in the west. But the global opinion, wherever you cite it. And so it's not just Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia, since it's the most reliable and most strict in the citation, is given preference and weight. And then you see other countries that are cited. Another thing that comes also to this, before we continue, is that if somebody saw the moon, or the moon was sighted in the middle of the day, does that count? No, it doesn't count. It has to be at the night. It's night. So sometimes, I think it was maybe a couple of years ago as well, people were using the citation in the daytime, saying this is proof that it was signed yesterday. No, the daytime citation doesn't count, and we don't give it any weight. It's only at night. So all of this shows that one of the two opinions, our responsibility is to go with our communities, whatever they're going with, your local masjid, your reliable source, you go to them. And you see also in our city, most of the masajid are going towards the global sighting because of the unity. And also recently some of the Hanafis, they reverted back to that opinion. And some of them still take the local sighting, even though it's not the mu'tamid of their madhab. Again, it's interesting because every group will have to take that which is the most correct. So inshallah, this helps explain a little bit about the citation. The job of the Muslim obviously is to make sure that they're fasting with the people. Because the last benefit on this one, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, he mentions that the hilal, the crescent moon that saw in the sky, isn't necessarily the criterion for the citation. Why? He says, إِنَّمَا الْهِلَالُ مَا يَسْتَهِلُّ بِهِ النَّاسِ. The hilal is what the people also determine and they're going to practice. Means, if someone saw something, then it's not enough. It's that people have to give consideration to it. And the reason why he's mentioning that, let's say in a country or a community you're in, everybody's going one day, and you think femininely it's the other day. What are you supposed to do? Go with the majority. That's the key. Don't just say, oh no, I don't agree. No, go with the majority. And that's a benefit, because if it's just about citation then there'll be a lot of differences within a country, and ultimately this is not the higher objective of the Sharia. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Now we're going to move, inshallah, to the next part of the book where the Shaykh talks about next chapter. Babu ahkam al-muftirina fi Ramadan. The chapter of those who are allowed to break their fast in Ramadan. Issue 875. وَيُبَاحُ الْفِطْرُ فِي رَمَضَانِ لِأَرْبَعَةِ أَقْسَامٍ. It is permissible to break the fast for 4 categories of people. So last week we spoke about those who have to fast and those who don't have to fast. So the author is going to tell us who can break their fast according to Islamic legislative opinion. All right? So the point is that if someone doesn't have these conditions, it's not allowed for them to break the fast. The scholars, they mentioned that's considered a serious violation, a sin. And the benefit the scholars take is someone breaks their fast in Ramadan for no reason. Means they're not going to fast today for no reason. Then it's a serious sin. It's a major sin. Imam Zahabi puts in Kitab al-Kabair. Not fasting Ramadan is a major sin. Someone doesn't fast the whole month, are they kafir or not? What's the most correct opinion? They're not kafir, but Islam is definitely question mark or very low. And they consider this fasiq, this person, a wicked person. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because many people break their fast without justification. Yeah, today I have an appointment, I have a game, and you hear I have an exam. You think if you fast, you think you're not going to do good in the exam? What the fasted person dua is actually answered the whole day. See, if you ask Allah, if you fast, dua is answered. You have to pass the exam. You break your fast, you may fail the exam. All right, this is why some people have to be mindful of this point. It's very sad. We see this today. So we have to tell people, if you don't have udhr shar'i, you can't break your fast. No legislative excuse, you can't. So the reason why the sheikhs mentioned the categories, so you know who they are, and you can't just make up your own ruling. First one, 876. أحدها المريض الذي يتضرر به. Number 1 is a sick person who, if they were to fast, they would become harmed by the fast. So the sick person is allowed to break their fast because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions them in the Quran. مريض على سفر, or someone is sick. So scholars now say the sick person, there's categories. Shaykh put the condition, restriction, الذي يتضرر به, who's going to be harmed by the fast. So scholars, they mention it into 3 categories. A sick person is in 3 categories. Category 1, the one who the fast will harm him. In this case, this person it's a wajib, he doesn't fast. Let's say somebody is sick with a sickness. If I were to fast, I get worse, or I'm going to get harmed. You're not allowed to fast. Wajib, you break your fast. Because Allah says, وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ. Don't put your hands into destruction or into your own destruction. So if someone, for example, let's give the Shaykh give the example, someone who has kidney disease, he needs dialysis. It's clear that this person can't go without water, they can't go without this. So that person, if they say, I'm going to fast, then it's haram to fast because it's going to harm his body. There's no harm, no reciprocating harm. And this is a principle in the Sharia. You can't harm yourself. The first category, if you were to fast, you're going to harm yourself definitively. Haram to fast. Category 2, it's going to become difficult to fast, but there's no harm. It's difficult, but there's no harm. So this person, is it better to fast or not to fast? Scholars say it's better for him to break the fast, permissible to fast. Why? Because if he were to fast, it's hard, so it does, but not harmful, so you can fast, it counts. Now, why is it better to break your fast? Sharia give us allowance to break the fast? Better to take the allowance of the Sharia. Because that person, it's hard for them. For example, somebody has kind of sickness, that a flu or something that if they were to fast, it's going to be very weak, but they can make it. Better they don't and they make up that day later, but if they want to fast, they get rewarded and it counts. Because of the hadith, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that we take His rukhas, the excuses or allowances, the allowances of Allah, He gives us. كَمَا يَكْرُهَ أَن تُؤْتَ مَحَارِمِهِ. Just like Allah hates that we come to near His prohibitions. And the third category is a person who, if they were to fast due to their sickness, there's no harm, no difficulty. Like, for example, someone has a light headache, someone has a broken leg. The leg has nothing to do with Ramadan, right? So you can't say, my leg hurts. What does that have to do with your body? Or someone, for example, has some light cold, not a serious cold. That person, he has to fast. It's haram to when they break the fast. This is according to the majority of scholars. And so here we take the benefit that if the person is sick, he has to check which category they're in. They can't just say, I'm sick. So the reason why the category is there, so someone doesn't just go and say, I'm sick, I'm not going to fast. Because what is intended by marid is the one who's going to be harmed by it. So that condition or restriction the Shaykh mentions is the key. So we must be very careful. So what's the difference between a A light cold and a flu, well, the difficulty versus no difficulty. A migraine versus a headache, big difference, right? Migraine, you could be out in your bed, you can't stand, it's very hard. Versus someone who says, I have a headache. Yeah, you have to check yourself. You know yourself. Allah, He sees you. So a person, we should tell the people these rules, so that if they do take the allowance, we're not going to be strict. They know what they're doing, inshallah, they're following the rules. But if somebody doesn't know this, you have to tell them, look, there's the categories. You can't just say, I'm sick. So you find today many people that they did this. If they did it in the past, they should not do it in the future. The second one, the Shaykh says, وَالْمُسَافِرُ, traveler, الَّذِي لَهُ الْقُصْرُ, الَّذِي لَهُ قَصْرُ, who has the right to break to shorten the prayer. فَالْفِطْرُ لَهُ مَا أَفْضَلُ. Therefore, for these people, it's better to break their fast. So the musafir, we already studied the traveler before, so one who is allowed to shorten their prayer. Hence, if whoever is not a musafir can break their fast. But the scholars now, they add some other conditions. Does it have to be difficult travel or not? Some of the scholars have said that if it has to be hard for them, or some they said it has to be a travel in which if there's no difficulty, you can fast. But the correct view is that it doesn't have to be difficult. Even if there's a little bit of difficulty, or the fact that he's traveling, he's allowed to break his fast. And it's better for him to fast if the scholars say if it's not difficult for him, because Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam used to fast when he traveled. However, since he's allowed to break your fast, then this person has the allowance, and it's up to him and what they consider to be difficult. Okay? Because Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam used to fast when he's traveling. That shows that it's better if there's no difficulties. Because traveling, we said, is it based on difficulty? Is the illah, the causation for traveling difficulty? No. It's the fact that you're traveling, you passed your country outside the borders. And the reason why it's important is because some people say today's time there's no difficulty. You go on an airplane, you come out. Is that correct? Most people travel, is that correct? You go in the airport, coming out of that place, you're in air condition or heat. It's not true. Right? Your head's probably going to be hurting, your diet is all over the place, you feel tired, so there is still difficulty. Some people say there's no difficulty, the ulama said there is, and even if there wasn't, the Sharia didn't put safar, the illah as mashaqqa, its illah is that the fact you actually left the place, you actually are musafir, left your country or your borders of your city. And then the next one, he says 877, وَعَلَيْهِمَا الْقَضَاءُ, and upon both of them is qada, to make it up. And 878, وَإِن صَامَا أَجْزَهُمَا, but if they fasted, it counts. So qada means after Ramadan, they have to make up those days. عِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. So you have to make up the days you missed. Hence, someone should be mindful of the days they missed when they travel and they're sick. They should either write it down or keep a track of it, because later on they have to make it up. A lot of people, they're not very careful with this. They have like a very lax. So later on they say, oh, for next Ramadan, oh, I forgot how many. I mean, unless you're traveling a lot, you shouldn't forget how many. You should know. Or maybe someone, you don't even remember anymore. Sometimes it happens, they forget. And then they may remember they have ones before. So scholars say, what happens if you get confused? You do taqdeer. You try your best to estimate how many it is, and inshallah that will count. But you should be careful with it, because it's the haqq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon you. So you shouldn't be so lax with it. Try to make sure you have some kind of numbering. The last one we take for today, 879, الثاني. So the first category, he put them together, 1 and 2, which is marid, the sick, who's harmed by sickness, and the traveler. And then 879, الحائض والنفساء تفطران وتقضيان وإن صامتا لم يجزيهما. So 879, 880, that the woman who is menstruating or is having postpartum bleeding, both of them have to break their fast, and if they were to fast, it would not count. And why would it not count? That's a preventative. From the conditions of fasting, there's no mani'. This is from the mawani'. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he told us in the hadith, isn't that when a woman menstruates and she in the state of menstruation, she doesn't fast, doesn't pray, which means that there's no fasting. So there's some other details in there, but inshallah we'll end with this much. Next week, inshallah ta'ala, we'll take the next issue along with what's remaining of this in terms of the hamil wal murdi'u, the nursing woman and the pregnant woman, and some of the details about whether or not they break their fast, do they feed, all of these questions. Inshallah, anyone has any questions, inshallah ta'ala, we'll take it. What? Can you use a telescope to sight the moon? Yes, you can to help us. So scholars say if you use a telescope and you also use the eyes, inshallah it counts because it's just amplifying what the eye can see. So it's not calculations, but usually you see the experts, they're out there, they can see with the eye, but it's permissible to use it. And scholars, they pass the fatwa. Allahu alam. Yes? So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam used to fast when traveling, and he said it's better to take the rukhas. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is not like us. He's stronger. But also they say because there was no difficulty. So they say that if there's a difficulty, they take the rukhas. If it's not, then go with what Prophet did. Because he's the best example. But you could see that some of the Sahaba did it, and many of them didn't. And that was the benefit. Some fasted when they traveled, and some didn't. No one criticized the other. So scholars ultimately say it goes back to the present difficulty. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was easy for him. But that doesn't mean that he would tell people what he would do is you should do. So that's how they reconcile it. Yes. So someone who's often traveling and he's fasting at the same time, or he finds it easy, he can fast. No problem, because there's no difficulty. And ultimately, the scholar, the Shaykh, said it counts if they were to fast, either way. So the person, he makes the judgment. The question is, if he has a rukhsah, he can break it. If he fasts, no one has a problem with it. But Allah told us you can. So, for example, a pilot who's traveling all the time, he can break his fast if he feels like it. But then, because he's traveling, but if he wants to fast, inshallah, it counts. But the thing is that if the person is traveling a lot, he has to be mindful of his situation. He would know best. No, it goes back. They say go back to the mashaqqa to see better or not. And ultimately, scholars say because if there's no harm and he's traveling, him taking the rukhsah is permissible, and him doing what Rasulullah did is better. But scholars, since they differ on it, some of them just say ultimately the person has a choice to do that. So some scholars say it's better to take rukhsah, some say follow Prophet Sallallahu, that's better. Ultimately, since the person will decide what's difficulty or not, so we're not going to tell the person, we're going to tell them these are the rules, you decide where you are on that. Yes. Good. So someone's outside of this, for example, he has sickness which is chronic. That person is ajiz now, he's incapable of fasting. So he's outside this. So here the marid is the one who's going to be cured. This is the marid there. So the one who's ajiz is out already. He's going to do feeding. We're going to get to later, that person. So the person, like for example, has diabetes. And he's not going to, the doctor, you're not going to fast the whole month, for example. Then he's just going to feed. And we'll see the rulings. How does he feed? How does he do that? So the question is, someone who has a rukhsah, does he have to conceal it? Not necessarily. He's permissible for him. But some scholars say from Bab Adab, you wouldn't necessarily want to eat in front of anybody who's fasting, but it's not haram for them to do that either. But someone obviously has good consideration. In fact, that Ramadan is not the best, especially if the da'if amongst us, and if we're already hungry, and somebody is just coming and eating. But the problem we have in our culture today, people think it's haram. It's not haram, and the person does that. He has an excuse. So, but we should be careful is that if somebody's eating in Ramadan, how do we know they have an excuse or not, Sometimes you should tell them it's Ramadan or leave them to know. But you're right, is it better? Some say it's better to respect the month. Because it is a blessed month of Ramadan. So if you're going to break the fast, like most of the cultures, you see them, they eat privately without everyone around them. And there's nothing harm in that. But it's not good for someone to not have any concern for this blessed month. This is a sign of Allah, this Ramadan. So for example, someone just sitting there eating in front of everybody, they saying I have the permissible. It's not good etiquette. It's not good etiquette. Anyone else? So qada and ada, the scholars they discuss in usul fiqh. Qada and ada have to do with actions which have timing. Any action which has a timing period, then if you do it in the time, it's called ada. And if you miss the time, it's called qada. That's qawl al-sahih min usuliyun. They say this. So if there's no time period, there's no qada. So here Ramadan, you have, for example, the whole month, every day you have one. So when you miss that day, you do qada because it has a time. But things like Hajj, for example, you don't say someone did ada for Hajj because there's no time. For it's when it's wajib on you. There's time when you start the Hajj when it's supposed to finish, but there's no time where it's wajib on someone. So that's how they differ on it. And then they use these terms on. And the next one, which is i'ada, repeating. So ada, i'ada, and qada. These are the three terminologies in usul fiqh. Ada means you performed it in the time period for something which is time bound. I'ada is to repeat it because you broke it by doing something like a nullifier. And qada is you made it up after his time is ended due to a reason. So the idea is qada is only when you're allowed to. That's the principle. So you can't do qada what the sharia didn't allow you. That's the key. Let's say salah, we know you can do qada because you have adillah. But can I, for example, I missed something, say I'm going to do qada myself? No, you can't. The sharia permits you to do qada. It has to give you proof and know how and when. An example will be Jum'ah. You finish Jum'ah or you miss Jum'ah, what do? You do qada? Anyone does qada? What do? Badal. You have to substitute. You do dhuhr. You miss Eid, you do qada? Yes, Eid is qada. So this shows you the sharia tells you what's qada and what you can make up, what you can't make up. The problem people have today is that they say, today I'm just going to do it later, I'm going to do qada. You don't decide the qada. So you find some people doing that. And some scholars, they get really into the details. If you woke up late for Salatul Fajr and prayed it after his time, is it qada or is it ada? These are the khilafat, that just the details. But these terminology are important to remember. So al-ada, you performed an action in its prescribed time. Al-i'ada is to repeat it because you broke your nullified a condition or a pillar. And then qada is to make it up outside the time is due when the sharia permitted you to do it. Any last? I think, okay, last one. So how do you do qada for Eid? If you missed it, you woke up late, you could pray as it is in your house. If, for example, your whole family missed it, you can gather them together and do jama'ah, or you could do by yourself. 7 and 5, that's it. You read loudly, that's just the same. And that's because, as we said before, Anas bin Malik, he used to do that. Whenever he missed it, he would gather his family. He did the whole Eid the same way. So, alhamdulillah, Eid, if you were to miss it or somebody can't come for work, he can do it by himself, inshallah, at home. He can do it, because he's missing it. But the idea is that the key is that because the Sharia allowed Eid, but Jum'ah, there's no qada. So some people say, oh, I miss Jum'ah, let's say, I'm going to go my own khutbah, my own. You're not going to do your own khutbah, You're not going to do that. Allah make it easy. Subhanak, bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.